All right. Okay. Hello. Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Understanding Film with Mike Reiff. Glad to have you back again, Michael. This
Thanks,
is.
Alex. I appreciate the rebranding. It is just understanding film, but with the Pinion Public Library, really, you're the one that's made this happen.
Oh,
Yes.
I appreciate that too.
Congratulations. Yeah.
All right. I feel like you need no introduction, but if you want to just say a word about yourself and then dive into Isle of Dogs and the films of Wes Anderson.
Yeah, well, right. So I'm Mike Reiff talking about film. I teach at Ithaca High School, but huge Wes Anderson fan, as I know many people are on this call and many people are who'll be viewing this. So let's get right to it. So Isle of Dogs is currently Wes Anderson's most recent film. He does have a new one coming out either this year or next. It is not his first animated film. He made the fantastic Mr. Fox a few years before this. And that was such an arduous experience for him. He said, I'm never making an animated film again. Well, he did it. He made Isle of Dogs, but it is a very different film. I'll note that I'm not going to sort of have frames from other Wes Anderson films, but I'm going to be referencing some of his classic visual tropes and visual styles in this presentation. I do recommend, though, if you haven't seen a Wes Anderson film, or maybe you've only seen one or two, like you've only seen the Royal Tenenbaums or Grand Budapest Hotel, search out his stuff. He really is wonderful. And if you haven't seen this one, check it out because it is really great.
Ooh.
Just a quick plot recap. So this is a film about this area in Japan. I don't know if it's I think it's what does it say, Nagasaki City, so I think it's sort of an invented place, but this mayor Kobayashi has a vendetta against dogs, and so he exiles all the dogs to Trash Island, which it's implied is like a Kobayashi business venture gone bad. That's sort of the implication in the film. It's never said outright, but it's sort of his failure. So he exiles all the dogs he doesn't like under the auspices that they're sick with snout fever, which is sort of just like bad allergies, but he's used it as this cover to exile all the dogs, and he's a big cat lover, of course. And then halfway or a quarter way through the film, this young boy who is his ward, Kobayashi's ward, goes to Trash Island to try to rescue his dog who's been exiled there, Atari. What's really interesting about the film is that, aside from everything I'm about to talk about, is that all the characters, all the Japanese characters speak Japanese and there's no subtitles. And this is said in the beginning of the movie. There's not going to be subtitles for the Japanese characters, but all the dogs speak English. And it says all the dogs have been translated, their barks have been translated English. And so much like a Wes Anderson film, it has this lush, fantastic cast. You've got Edward Norton, who's been in Wes Anderson films, Harvey Keitel as well. You've got Bill Murray, of course, Bob Balaban. They've been in many of his films. Tilda Swinton, Greta Gerwig. So he's got all these wonderful voice actors, and as well as a few Japanese performers playing these Japanese characters. So really great cast. It's the kind of experience where like, who's that? I feel like I recognize that person.
David.
Absolutely. And Bryan Cranston from Breaking Bad also does the main dog. So along the way, Atari meets with this pack of puppies who, of course, have their very specific styles, and I'll talk about them in a bit. And adventures ensue. And does he reunite with the dog? I'll let you watch it if you haven't seen it and find out. We're not going to spoil plot here. We don't need to. So a couple quick, classic things for Wes Anderson. If you go all the way back to The Royal Tenenbaum, probably his first major film that established him as a specific kind of artist. I guess Rushmore too, and this is true there too. He does montages, so like quick cuts that move you through time quickly and probably have some kind of change in your understanding of the plot by the end of a montage, or some changes occurred in the characters. But he likes doing this with narration and music, and usually there's sort of, I don't know how else to describe it, just quirky details. And so we get an early one when we're talking about Trash Island, where all the dogs are, and you see these sort of quick tableaus of what the dogs are experiencing. Probably they're not doing well because they're starving on this island, not because of snout fever, which doesn't really exist. But we get these quick takes of the dog facing down a rat, and then sort of this little poodle walking across this pipe, and again, this image of them in the sleeping and dozing in the car heap, and sort of the way that their eyes are bulging out here in the tire. And so we kind of cut through very quickly, and you get not just narration explaining what's happening to these dogs and what's happening on Trash Island. We get all these quick views of Trash Island too, or sort of quickly moving through space. So you get a full encompassing understanding of the setting the film's going to be set in without having to sort of have characters explain it. It's just very quickly moving you through. We get later on a different montage where Atari is reconnecting with a different dog. And this one is, the music is accompanied by Jason Schwartzman, who's been in a lot of Wes Anderson films, and he provides music for this film. What's interesting about this montage is a lot of it is shot with these silhouetted characters. Whereas in the earlier montage, all the dogs are very specific and sort of their garish decrepitude as they're abandoned on the island. You have these moments where sort of the human and the dog are kind of meshing because of the silhouetted framing, as though now we're seeing human and beast sort of coming together. In fact, whimsically in this shot, he's standing on the dog. He'd break the dog's back if he was doing this literally, unless it's a very strong dog. But sort of the way that Wes Anderson uses montage in this sequence to kind of meld them together, and by the end, you do have a coming together of characters. Wes Anderson's also very well known for his really packed mise en scène. So mise en scène is a French term for the design of the shot. And sometimes mise en scène can be open and sort of airy. Sometimes it can be very chaotic and difficult to understand what's to be pulled from it that's meant to make you feel anxious. Wes Anderson's are both very orderly, but also very packed. And so you can kind of pause it and study the image for like 5 minutes if you want. So shots like this are filled with information from left to right. You have all these trash cubes, like something out of the beginning of WALL-E. And each little cube has very specific things, all these little circles and bars and things. But notably, he's also a great designer of mise en scène, both for symbolic maybe meaning, but also attention. So all this is gray except for the zone in the middle, where you do have these pops of colors on the tomato and these little letters. It says dog, in fact, upside down on the little a little banner, and some other things there. And all, of course, our eyes are drawn to this dog, and his eyes are sort of looking to the side. So later on in the film, we have this really elegant, beautiful sequence where they're sort of in this igloo of bottles. And I'm not sure where the light's supposed to be coming from. It's just sort of artistic and elegant. But all the lights casting down. So we have this rainbow glow as Atari is fixing up the dogs after they got in a fight. Again, we have this moment where the dog is shot in silhouette here against the backdrop of these bottles. So a beautiful sequence, and also sort of evoking, never better than in this film. This is throughout all Wes Anderson's films, that characters will take what they can possibly get. I don't think it's materialistic. I think it's sort of, we take the artifacts and the small things that we surround ourselves with to form identity. And this little home is a way for them to kind of reconfigure before they go on their final quest. This has been advancing through his career, where now it's almost to, I don't want to say an absurd degree, but it's a very decisive degree, that especially in the Grand Budapest Hotel, which came out before this, and then Isle of Dogs, camera moves either left or right very diametrically, geometrically, or it's moving in sort of 45-degree pans. If it's going to move slightly diagonally or off center, it's for like a moment of tension. There's something actually similar to this in The Shining and Kubrick's film, but in Wes Anderson films, I think it is more just for style and more sort of for the kind of world he's evoking. And so we see panning camera movements, and I would almost say this is sort of like West meets East, or maybe West meets East. You see that, Alex? So in this opening sequence after the montage in Trash Island, he pans from left to right. And so instead of connecting space through quick cuts, he pans this longer stretch. And so we are moving, imagine the camera's panning from left to right. We start here, and we're sort of panning across, and we get this long view of Trash Island. And it resolves from this close-up on the dog on the couch to this wide pan of all the dogs in the field. So the composition has changed, even though there's no cut. We sort of just pan from left to right. What's interesting about this is exactly also the way you'd read a Japanese scroll, and or a Japanese sort of text narrative. And in the beginning of the film, there's another bit of narration that is told through sort of this faux Japanese scroll. So obviously this is not real. This is something that Wes Anderson created for the purpose of the film. But in the same way that you'd read a scroll in traditional Japanese art, we're panning from, and then the dog pops up there to narrate. We're panning from left to right, or maybe it's right to left, more the Japanese way. But we have this panning sequence that is both evocative of the art of the setting he's setting his film in, as well as sort of mirroring what Wes Anderson's done. I haven't found any research or interviews with Wes where he said, like, well, I'm basing my camera movements on Japanese art. I think it was just one of these happenstances, and that's sort of how the film worked out. So it's a really interesting little cultural wrinkle there. And of course, the whimsy that these dogs are attacking all the samurai here. Another little technique he likes to use is sort of an extreme zoom. So we really zoom in on characters for dramatic effect. I've noticed that zooming cameras, frankly, dating back to 1922's M and Fritz Lang's early sound film, is often the visual grammar for an understanding, a dawning understanding of a character. There's a scene early on in that really early sound film where detectives realizing something, the camera zooms in and zooms in. And you see something very similar with a lot of Wes Anderson moments. So here we have a scene where this interpreter, played by Frances McDormand, of course, voiced by her, we zoom way in as she's dawning on something about something terrible that's about to happen to all the dogs. And so we kind of zoom right in. So it's not just sort of action and excitement, but also understanding. And we also have a moment here where Atari, in beautiful sort of symmetrical pattern, all the dogs are surrounding him, realizes sort of the depth of what his uncle or wardship is doing as this drone is hovering over him and is about to sort of attack. And so we have this sort of harsh zoom effect that also leads us into, in this particular moment, something unique to this film because it's animated, where Wes Anderson riffs on animation styles. So as you can tell, right, this is sort of stop motion animation, which was the same thing with Fantastic Mr. Fox, and his attention to detail kind of drove him crazy. He's innovating in this film also with motion. So all these little puffs they look like puffs of air coming from the drone hovering above them, or sort of helicopter blades. And there's moments where dogs attack and it's like puffs of air. It's amazing how he creates that fluidity out of stop action animation. But anyway, so this is all stop action. But once in a while, we see 2D animation. So the sequence has where Atari's looking up at the drone, and then we cut to him shooting up a slingshot. But viewed from the drone's lens, suddenly the animation becomes 2D. It becomes pencil drawn. And this is throughout the film. I only noticed this. And so we have these stop motion animation characters watching a 2D animation image. And I only noticed this the second time I watched the film, that throughout the movie, anytime you see the characters on a TV or a drone screen, we stop seeing stop action animation. We see sort of variations on 2D or hand-drawn animation. So here there's sort of propaganda against how nasty dogs are, even though they're never like this in the movie. It's just Kobayashi's propaganda. And then also here, so here's Kobayashi giving a talk on a talk show, and he's hand-drawn. Little different style, though, from this one and this one. And here's also a news reporter. I'm not really sure sort of what the meaning of that is, but just an interesting flourish that for someone who was like, I don't want to do animation anymore, he did more animation styles than he needed to in this film, right? He could have made this stop action in the TV as well. If you look at this image too, it says AV department. This is a TV on a college campus in this scene. And it points out, and also all the Japanese lettering in tiny script right below it. And of course, the Japanese lettering on the microphone. And of course, some here on the chalkboard. If you haven't noticed, Wes Anderson loves having words on and in the image. And so it's not surprising that he has these big, bold calligraphy in the opening credits of the film. First, the Japanese splash, a little dog icon up here, and then Isle of Dog below. Sometimes with chapter titles. He loves chapter titles, something that Agnes Varda pioneered and sort of played around with in the 1960s. Wes Anderson loves these chapter titles. So prologue here, and of course he matches Roman calligraphy with Japanese. It's almost like, how else can I get more titles on the screen? I'll have two languages. And so here, you know, the boy, the samurai, and the headless ancestor, another chapter intertitle. Here's sort of this note to the viewer, so sort of a metatextual discussion about what this film's going to be. Again, that you know, humans will speak in their native tongue. And he has all of his different caveats there. But sometimes also dogs will speak in haiku, and he sort of has that explained on the screen. But even here, right, his little tiny bucket of rum or something, some kind of alcoholic beverage, I think it's brandy, it says Jupiter there. It's the name both of the dog and the brandy. Sometimes it's just signs like this that kind of add a pop of color. But the more you watch these Wes Anderson films, it's as though, in the same way that items help us define our identity, the power of words and beautiful calligraphy, and the uniqueness of all the range of calligraphy and the way that we can sort of shape our designs. Here, this is a close-up on Nutmeg, this character voiced by Scarlett Johansson. But if we look very closely, and again, right, it happens so quick, you'd have to pause it. Megasaki Society of Purebred Show Dogs, registered A2279. Like, why have this much detail? But it tells you, right? She's been talking about being a purebred, and it's attaching there, so these identifiers. School newspaper, of course, some of our main characters that sort of upset the power dynamic in the film, but also the way that it's beautifully symmetry. And then also here later on, we see that one of the dogs has even his tooth is imprinted, and it says military grade. It's sort of these little bomb teeth that he can spit out. But the idea, we do a harsh zoom in, classic Wes Anderson, and we can see this tiny Japanese, and then a little translation pops up there. Interesting, elegant sort of touch. We have this monument to one of the dogs at the end, not saying if he's passed or not. But it's very similar actually to the final shot. So this is one of the final shots of the film. It's also similar to one of the final shots of the Grand Budapest Hotel, which also ends with a statue. Not exactly sure what that's about, except sort of the way that many of his films have a melancholy streak as we think through the past and we think about honoring people we've interacted with. Many of his films are about storytelling too. And of course, this shot gives you that beautiful symmetry I'll talk about later, these trees and the way the pagoda is sort of surrounding there. Characters look at the camera a lot in Wes Anderson films, and we have that quite a bit here, except that there's a lot of characters, perhaps many more than usual, and he uses depth of field to provide sort of different ways. So we have these three looking, and of course the main one really staring us down. Here's sort of in the montage early on, this one crazed dog staring at us. We can kind of see the look in his eyes. And here's a rival gang of dogs staring us down. And it just goes on and on. Here's Harvey Keitel's dog, much later in the film, sort of seemingly at first kind of odd and strange, but he turns out to be a noble, gentle giant. So an interesting flourish that you see in a lot of his films, especially the more recent ones, and I'll come back to that. Just as an interlude, let's look at a scene that combines text on screen plus the zoom in plus looking at the camera. There's this moment where Greta Gerwig's character is talking about, how are we going to find the secrets of Kobayashi's regime and bring him down? And so we can see Hacker's Corner. So why would you say that this is Hacker's Corner if you're a hacker? And we do a dramatic zoom in, the character looks at the screen, we have all the words on the screen. So sort of combining a bunch of Wes Anderson's techniques all in one beautiful 3-second sequence. Something that is pretty new for Wes Anderson in this film that I think actually has a good deal of impact as opposed to just kind of visual flourish is subjective experience. So once in a while, well, I'll say frequently, we have shots like this where we can see most of the frame is just looking at an image. We have this rival gang, they're staring down a trash bag, they want to know what scraps are in there. And we have a dog here. So this is sort of a classic subjective way to film. You would have your character over to the side and we're looking past them. So it's not quite from their point of view, but the visual languages, we're pretty much looking at the world from that dog's point of view. However, in this shot here, we have a dog looking down on an ear that's been torn off. So this is definitely from the dog's point of view. We can see the paws. There's a strange montage where someone makes sushi, and here they're sort of gripping. So we can see the hands of the person, sort of like a chef show from 10 years ago, gripping this still wriggling a tentacle. And here we have Atari, who's just landed on Trash Island. We can see his feet, his little socks and the sandals, and we're looking through his helmet at the dog staring at him. This kind of really, in the subjective point of view, in the first person point of view, is pretty new for Wes Anderson. And it does kind of break some of his artifice to sort of lodge it that much. These are very well controlled shots, but at the same time, you're sort of ceding some control to lodge our view in a character's point of view like that. And he plays also around with focus quite a bit in this, because of course, if we're looking at an image like this close up, the stuff behind us will be out of focus. Totally unnecessary in a film, and definitely unnecessary in a stop action film. He's obviously exerting quite a bit of artifice here, but it gives you that, again, subjective point of view as Atari's holding up the dog picture of the dog he's missing. Here again, we're looking at it from his point of view. Sometimes, though, it's not just subjective, but also impressionistic. So here we have these images of the dogs looking directly at us, right? Check, another Wes Anderson technique. And it's subjective in terms of we're looking maybe directly at it, but there's no, in the context of this montage here, looking at these dogs, there's no reason to have this cloud behind it. It's just sort of emphasizing the intensity of the dog's look. We have another example of it here. And then even pushing it even further, we have a moment here where one of the main characters is talking to the purebred that we just saw her title, her little tag, and she says, imagine me, she's doing a trick, and she says, I don't have my tools, my props with me, but imagine me doing this with a bowling ball. And so Wes Anderson gives us this circle, sort of, and so we can literally see what the dog is imagining. He says, yeah, I can picture it, sort of deadpan. We've never had anything like this in a Wes Anderson film that I can remember, where we can sort of see the image within the character's mind. And then he riffs on this at the end again, where she's like, imagine me doing it on one foot, juggling bowling pins on fire. So, it's this really kind of playful sequences that are also kind of pushing how much connection can we get to these characters, because oftentimes Wes Anderson characters do feel a little distant, a little ironic, and so what other things can we do to bridge that gap? And I think it's an interesting flourish. We'll see if he wants to pick up with this again, or if this is just a one-off because it's an animated film. Sort of bringing back to what we talked about last month with the Kuleshov effect, we also have sort of combining a lot of things. This moment where Spot realizes maybe he's related to the dog that Atari is looking for, except he has a black nose and this one has a pink one. He's looking at the mirror almost like Lacanian mirror theory. I won't get into that, don't worry, Alex. But so he's looking back and forth at the picture in the mirror. And then we have these moments where now we're on Atari's point of view looking at Spot. And then we switch to Spot's point of view looking at Atari. And it's this elegant moment of understanding for them, but it's also one of the most subjective views of the film in terms of we're really going to be lodged in these two characters' points of view. And of course, he looks a little roughed up there for sure. And absolutely, we have our final moment here where he gives the biscuit that he meant to give to the dog he's looking for, so this bridging, this friendship. And to complete it, of course, we could see Atari's hand here holding onto the biscuit, which of course is printed with a little word because it's Wes Anderson, right? Finally, this is throughout many of his films, from Moonrise Kingdom to Rushmore, I suppose, all the way back to the beginning, but precocious young heroes, especially when adults fail us. So I know, Alex, you're looking for a theme, and I'd say this is probably one of the big ones to be considering. Never in his films have adults failed him to this degree that you have this despotic Kobayashi mayor putting all the dogs, all the famous and favorite pets on an island to perish, and so the kids have to go and fix this. But precociousness, of course, is wisdom beyond their age. And oftentimes these characters, through the way they dress, the way they act, the way they talk, and their actions and their goals, they act much more wise and sometimes more mature than the adults. And so Atari is, of course, part of that, even as he's sort of goofy with this metal thing sticking out of his head because of the crash landing. His sort of determination to fix, in just this one dog's case, the wrong of Kobayashi is part of that. We see that Greta Gerwig's character is also quite wise and mature for her age, and she sort of leads this student newspaper gang to help overturn the Kobayashi regime. Of course, there's an eraser that actually says eraser on it. And then even to this point where, oftentimes one of the things that articulates the precociousness is these two young people will often, like in Moonrise Kingdom and elsewhere, have a romance that sort of seems beyond their years. And we see this towards the end of the film where it's not quite requited, but almost like he's proposing to her in this moment. And of course, the dogs are right there and Kobayashi's lurking in the background. And so it's an interesting way that we see this articulated in ways that are common. Towards the end, though, we have this sequence where the kids have sort of taken over, and we see this quick montage of Greta Gerwig's character and a couple other members of course, there's the hacker again, of the newspaper, and sort of they're making decisions for the city now, and they also all have their dogs with them, of course, paired very nicely with each character. And so the idea that the kids are kind of running the show at the end in some degree is very much so sort of in keeping with the Wes Anderson aesthetic, maybe pushing it a little bit further. And also so the symmetry in terms of, this isn't sort of cropped, this is the actual image. We have half here and then half here is the recorder of the audio. And that gets us to our final point that, it's almost too obvious to say that Wes Anderson has very precise and symmetrical shots. This is almost always the case, especially now. And one of the first shots of the film, sometimes it's symmetry and sometimes it has sort of a slight dynamism to it. And so we have this beautiful arrangement of the cats here. There's sort of one just a little out of place. That should probably be over there. And of course, there aren't cats here, but we do have a human being sort of offsetting sort of the balance of the sequence. But the main line of the image is this line down the middle, two cats perfectly aligned at the steps. So that's sort of setting the tone of we're not used to Wes Anderson movies. The final images of the film, though, we have this dog here and these 5 little puppies eating their little bowls, and there's a bowl right there for the mom dog. And we can see there is the symmetry. We have the red candle, white candle, calligraphy. But this gap doesn't feel right. Like, how can you leave us with this image, Wes? This isn't what we're expecting. But by the end of the sequence, we see the resolution. The other dog comes in. He's got his bowl. It's hard to see if the zoom column's taking this up, but there's a character looking at the screen just as a final bit. There's puppy snaps here, right here, because we need lettering. And so the way that, in many ways, and I'll note this here, even when sometimes it's off-center, though this one has that dynamism to it, we can see all of these little baseball players have their own space in the shot. And he does this not just in his animated films, in his live-action films, too. And so if you want another theme, Alex, because I know one's just not enough, it's the idea that I think for Wes Anderson, with all of his outsider characters, all of his misfits, all of his precocious kids, he really kind of emphasizes that everyone needs their own space. And in his most complex shots here, where we see the newspaper reporters demanding the freedom of the dogs, we can see everyone has their own little spot. No one's, even though there's tons of hands and signs and all this information, you can see everybody's face. As though Wes Anderson's saying, even when we work together and life is very chaotic, when we're respecting each other, especially when we're working in tandem, we're not in conflict, we can create that space for each other. And in the sequence here, towards the middle of the film, we can see, right, the main dog, Atari, and descending backwards, the minor characters sort of looking all at us in their space, seeing the viewer, sort of seeing the outside force and thinking through sort of how individuality really matters to someone like Wes Anderson. Folks, next month, we'll take some comments on Isle of Dogs if you want, but next month, just to give you a little tee up, we're going to be talking about The Hurt Locker. We've done now Ang Lee, we've done Wes Anderson, and we've done Coen Brothers. We're, of course, somewhat at the mercy of what we can get for free for all of our viewers, but this month on imdb.com, they are screening The Hurt Locker. It is Catherine Bigelow's 2010 Best Picture winner, an Iraq War film. It is also the first film that ever won Best Director by a woman director. Why it took 100 years seems pretty unfortunate, but it is a very intense film. It is R-rated. I think it's probably our first truly R-rated film of the series, but it is quite something. It also features 4 actors, Anthony Mackie, Jeremy Renner, and a couple others that were Guy Pearce that were in Avengers films. So, for the Avengers trivia fan, there it is. And just in keeping with the presentation, here's The Hurt Locker and the Japanese poster, just in case you want to take a look at that. So that's a little something for next week.
Next month, but excellent.
Next month.
Very good. Yes. Fascinating. Thank you very much. Wes Anderson is ripe with discussion points, and I appreciate the many themes you offered us. Good job there. Do we have any questions or comments from the audience?
I have one.
Mm-hmm.
Is there the reference to Kobayashi? Isn't that a Star Trek reference?
The Kobayashi Maru, right, the ship that was always doomed for failure. It might be. Wes Anderson hasn't shown, as far as I can remember, too many references to other pop culture, at least not in his later films. It's almost as if he's creating a hermetically sealed Wes Anderson universe. So I would only say it's probably not a Star Trek reference, because as much as he has things that feel like references, it's all sort of like more universal references to dog treats, the concept of dog treats. He doesn't have like a dog treat name. And the concept of science fiction, he doesn't actually cite one. So good call, though, Dr. Wright. Very good call.
And my other question is about Atari. Well, that's the old game system from 30 years ago. 40
That's
years
true, but there are no video games in the film. So, and Atari is a pretty common name, frankly, in Japan for different characters and things. But I think you might be also onto something there, that it's sort of the playfulness and sort of technological innovation too, right? That was one of the first video game systems out of Japan. And of course, it's a film that is pushing sort of artistry and stop motion animation.
Fascinating. You used the word artifice in relation to Wes Anderson, and I just would like to comment that I think that that's like probably the best word to us. Whimsy and artifice are the two words for Wes Anderson movies, and I think your the items you highlighted definitely show the artifice at play.
Yeah, and I think also, so oftentimes people will sometimes ding Wes Anderson for too much artifice or too much sort of falsity to the images. He's really, especially in like the Grand Budapest Hotel, in much of the film, pushing to almost a comical, and some would say cartoonish degree, the level of artifice. But if you watch that film, you realize by the end of the film, much of what you've seen is a different kind of subjective view. It's not literal, and it's not sort of impressionistic like we have in Isle of Dogs, but it's almost as if much of the story was the artifice of a character who's trying to hold on to a way of life in that film. And so I think he's really been both very exacting in pushing his craft to the most exacting level, while also recognizing there could be a purpose to this than just I have a style as a director. I think he is maturing as a director, thinking there's more to what I'm doing now than just I'm going to make a movie. And I think it's around the time of like Moonrise Kingdom and Grand Budapest, you start seeing that. I think like Darjeeling Limited, I love that one where they're on a train in India, was kind of like the point where he was almost starting to parody himself. And I think now he's kind of taken a step back and he's realized there's more that I can do here. And I'm really curious, of course, to see the next film that he's coming out with.
Is there a next film in the works? I haven't heard anything.
Yeah, let me just Google this real quick. I think it's done the rounds in some film fests and gotten some good reviews. The French Dispatch is what it's called. And I bet you if we look at the cast, it's going to have all your favorite people.
I'm sure.
Oh yeah, it's got Timothy Chalamet, or however you pronounce his last name.
Mm-hmm.
Adrian Brody, Owen Wilson, those are
right.
big ones, as well as Saoirse Ronan, Léa Seydoux, and Benicio del Toro. So that's a new one.
All these French names, yes.
I'm trying my best there.
The one you bungled was the Celtic one, though. Saoirse.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's true. You got me there, Alex.
The Celts are a strange people.
Yeah.
Alphabet.
It's very mysterious.
But okay, well, everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. In a month, we'll talk on November 20th. I think we were talking, Alex.
I think so, yeah.
Before the Thanksgiving break, so you can really enjoy your leftovers that Friday. You don't have to rush to your latest Penn Yan Public Library talking movies. But November 20th, we'll be talking about The Hurt Locker. And again, you'll be able to see that for free on imdb.com if you want, or, otherwise.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mike. Another excellent presentation. Thanks a lot. And thank you all for being here.
Very interesting.
Yes.
Thank you.
I see you there, Mr. Sperduti. Good to see you.
Great job. Hi.
Hey, Mike. Dave.
Hi.
Yay.
Everybody take care.
All
Okay.
right.
You too.
You
See ya.
too.